Assassin's Creed has 15 main protagonists spanning over a decade of games, and almost none of them are remembered the way they deserve. Some are overrated, some are criminally underrated. Today I'm ranking every single one, starting with the guy who started it all, Altair ibn Lahad. Here's the thing about Altair, he's the face of the entire franchise, the original assassin, and most people never actually finished his game. Assassin's Creed 1 was mechanically rough, repetitive missions, stiff combat, the same investigation loop 9 times in a row. A lot of players bounced off it hard, so Altair's reputation is built more on legacy than on lived experience. But if you follow his full arc, from the arrogant assassin who gets demoted in AC1 all the way through Revelations, where he's an old man locking himself in a library to die alone with the Apple of Eden, his story is genuinely one of the best in the series. The problem is that arc is split across 2 games, separated by 4 years. And if you only played the first one, you got the worst version of him. But at least Altair had the excuse of being first. The next protagonist didn't just improve on him, he made everyone forget Altair existed. Alexios/Cassandra. Assassin's Creed Odyssey did something no mainline entry had ever done before. It let you pick your protagonist. Alexios or Cassandra, brother or sister, same bloodline, same Peloponnesian War, completely different experience depending on who you chose. Here's the thing, Ubisoft marketed both equally, let players decide on day one, and then quietly confirmed that Cassandra is the canonical protagonist. That's right, if you played 80 hours as Alexios, fought the cult of Cosmos, sailed across ancient Greece, and felt like the true hero of the story, Ubisoft essentially said, cool, but actually it was Cassandra the whole time. The community had opinions about this. A lot of players picked Alexios, and Ubisoft's own data showed he was the more popular choice. But Cassandra's voice performance by Melisanthi Mahout is consistently praised as the stronger of the two, with fans arguing she brings more nuance and emotional range than Michael Antonikos' Alexios. It became one of those debates that never really ended, and beyond the protagonist split, Odyssey itself was a lightning rod. The game sold incredibly well and introduced full dialogue choices, romance options, and literal mythological creatures into the formula. Some fans loved the RPG evolution, others said it stopped feeling like Assassin's Creed entirely. No hidden blade, no brotherhood, just a massive Greek sandbox wearing the franchise's name. Whether that's a compliment or an insult depends entirely on what you think Assassin's Creed is supposed to be. But speaking of identity crises, let's talk about the protagonist who had to carry the weight of an entire Viking saga on their shoulders, Shay Cormac. On paper, Shay Cormac is the most interesting protagonist in the entire franchise. He's the only one who looks at the Assassin Brotherhood, decides they're wrong, and defects to the Templars. Not because he's corrupted, not because he's power-hungry, because he genuinely believes the Assassins are reckless and dangerous. And honestly, the game makes a solid case for it. Shay watches the Assassins trigger a catastrophic earthquake that kills thousands of innocent people, and when he raises concerns, they basically tell him to shut up and follow orders. So he doesn't. He walks away, joins the enemy, and starts hunting down his former brothers one by one. That's a genuinely compelling premise for a story, but here's the problem. Almost nobody played it. Rogue launched in November 2014, the exact same day as Assassin's Creed Unity. And while Unity got all the marketing, all the hype, and all the next-gen attention, Rogue was quietly released on last-gen consoles like an afterthought. It reviewed decently. Fans who actually played it loved the narrative inversion, but the cultural footprint just wasn't there. Shay's motivation is one of the most ideologically rich in the series, yet most of the community barely knows his name. He's the definition of a great concept buried by terrible timing. But if you think bad timing hurt Shay, wait until you see what it did to the next protagonist on this list, Arno Dorian. Arno Dorian might be the unluckiest protagonist in gaming history. Not because of his story, because of his launch. Here's the thing about Arno. His actual character arc is solid. A young man raised by a Templar, driven by guilt and revenge after his adoptive father's murder, falling in love with the enemy's daughter during the French Revolution. On paper, that's a compelling setup. And Dan Jeanot's performance capture work gives Arno genuine emotional weight in the quieter moments. But nobody cared, because when Unity launched in 2014, the game was borderline unplayable. We're talking single-digit frame rates in crowded areas, characters falling through the world, and the now legendary missing face bug where NPCs walked around with floating eyeballs and exposed teeth. Unity became a meme before most players even got to experience Arno's story, and that raises a question nobody wants to answer honestly. Is it fair to rank a character based on the broken product they shipped in? Arno didn't write the buggy code. His revenge narrative might lean generic, sure, and the love story with Elise doesn't reinvent the wheel. Some critics have actually defended Unity's story as underrated once you strip away the technical disaster. But the damage was done. Community rankings consistently place Arno near the bottom, and his reputation never fully recovered. Even after patches fixed most of the problems, Arno is a cautionary tale. Not of bad writing, but of bad timing. But if you think a rough launch is the worst thing that can happen to a protagonist, wait until you meet the Fry twins. Connor Kenway. Connor is the most misunderstood protagonist in this entire franchise. The community called him boring, stiff, a downgrade from Ezio, and honestly, they were wrong. Here's the thing about Connor. His story isn't designed to make you laugh or charm you. It's designed to make you uncomfortable. He's a half-Mohawk man fighting in the American Revolution, a war that supposedly represents freedom, while his own people are being systematically erased by both sides. Every alliance he makes is temporary. Every victory he earns costs him something. The revolution he bleeds for doesn't include him. And then there's Haytham Kenway, Connor's father, a Templar. Their relationship is one of the best narrative threads in the entire series. It's not a simple hero versus villain dynamic. Haytham genuinely believes he's right. Connor genuinely believes he's right. And watching them clash isn't satisfying, it's heartbreaking, because you can see the version of reality where they could have been allies. The American Revolution setting gave Assassin's Creed 3 a massive historical playground, but it also boxed Connor into a story where there are no real winners. That's not a weakness, that's the point. Connor doesn't get a happy ending because his people didn't get one either. He's not boring, he's devastated. There's a difference. But if Connor's story is a tragedy dressed as a revolution, the next protagonist is a party dressed as a pirate game. Eivor Varinsdottir. Eivor is a genuinely great character trapped inside a genuinely exhausting game, and that distinction matters. In Valhalla, you play as a Norse Viking leading raids into 9th century England, building a settlement, forging alliances, and slowly carving out a kingdom. The character is voiced by Magnus Brun as male Eivor and Cecilia Stenspiel as female Eivor, and both performances are excellent. Here's the thing though. Canonically, Eivor is female. Ubisoft confirmed this. The game handles the dual gender option through an animus explanation, where letting the animus choose defaults to female Eivor as the canonical version. So if you played the entire game as male Eivor, you technically played the non-canon version. Surprise. Now Eivor herself gets solid praise from the community. She's charismatic, surprisingly funny, and carries real emotional weight in her quieter moments. The problem was never the character. The problem is that Valhalla asks you to spend over 100 hours with her, and the game around her is bloated beyond reason. Repetitive arcs, padded regions, and a main story that just refuses to end. But commercially, Valhalla was a monster. It became one of the best-selling entries in the entire franchise, proving that people wanted to be a Viking even if they got tired halfway through. Eivor deserved a tighter game, but the fact that people still speak highly of her, despite Valhalla's length, says everything about how strong that character actually is. Speaking of characters, let's talk about someone the community is far less kind to. Aveline de Grandpré. Here's a character most of you have never played as, and that's not your fault. Aveline de Grandpré is the first female protagonist in Assassin's Creed history, and Ubisoft buried her on the PS Vita. That's right, a black, French-Haitian woman leading a AAA-adjacent Assassin's Creed game in 2012, set in colonial Louisiana during the height of the slave trade, and they put her on a handheld that most people forgot existed within a year. Let me be clear, Aveline is genuinely one of the most interesting protagonists in this entire franchise. Assassin's Creed 3. Liberation gave her a persona system where she could switch between 3 distinct disguises: the assassin, the lady, and the slave. Each persona changed how NPCs reacted to her, what areas she could access, and what combat options were available. It wasn't just a gimmick, it was a social stealth mechanic built directly into the reality of being a woman of mixed race in 18th century New Orleans. The game was literally using gameplay to comment on class, race, and gender in colonial America. But nobody played it. The Vita's install base was tiny, and by the time Liberation got an HD remaster on consoles, the moment had passed. The franchise had already moved on to Edward Kenway and the Open Seas. Aveline got left behind, not because she wasn't compelling, but because the platform she launched on was already dying. It's one of the franchise's biggest missed opportunities. But speaking of missed opportunities, let's talk about a protagonist who had every advantage and still divided the fanbase right down the middle: Bayek of Siwa. Now we need to talk about the man who started it all. Not Altair, not Ezio. Bayek of Siwa is the literal founder of the Hidden Ones, the organization that would eventually become the Assassin Brotherhood. Every hood, every hidden blade, every creed spoken in a shadowy room traces back to this one Egyptian Medjay. And the reason he built it? Grief. Bayek's son Kemu was murdered. That's the engine driving everything in Assassin's Creed Origins. Not politics, not ideology, not some grand philosophical war between order and freedom. A father lost his child, and he tore ancient Egypt apart looking for the people responsible. It's one of the rawest, most personal stories the franchise has ever told, and it hits different because Bayek isn't brooding or distant about it. He's warm. He loves people. He plays with children. In the villages he visits, he laughs. laughs, he protects strangers, and then you remember why he's doing all of this, and it guts you. Here's the thing. Origins wasn't just another sequel, it was a make-or-break moment for the entire franchise. The series had gone stale, and Ubisoft knew it. They took a full extra year of development, completely rebuilt the gameplay into an RPG system, and bet everything on Bayek carrying the emotional weight of a total reinvention. He did. The RPG pivot worked because it had a soul at the center of it, and that soul was a grieving father in 49 BCE Egypt building something that would outlast empires. But if Bayek represents the franchise's emotional peak, the next entry represents its most controversial experiment with the modern-day storyline, Evie Fry. Here's something that almost never happens in gaming. Jacob Fry got the marketing, he got the box art, he got the trailers, and then the community collectively decided his sister was the better protagonist. Evie Fry is the co-lead of Assassin's Creed Syndicate, set in 1868 Victorian London, and she represents something the franchise desperately needed after Unity's catastrophic launch: competence. Syndicate didn't reinvent the wheel, it just made sure the wheel actually worked this time, and Evie was a huge part of why. The twin system in Syndicate created a genuine mechanical split. Jacob was the brawler, the guy who punched his way through problems with brass knuckles and reckless energy. Evie was the stealth operative, calculated, precise, patient. Her skill tree leaned heavily into invisibility, stealth takedowns, and tactical planning, and for a franchise literally called Assassin's Creed, the character who actually assassinated people quietly felt like the correct way to play, and that's exactly why the community gravitates toward her. In fan discussions and rankings, Evie consistently gets more love than Jacob. Not because Jacob is bad, but because Evie feels like she belongs in this franchise on a fundamental level. She's methodical where Jacob is chaotic. She's focused where he's impulsive. She's the assassin, he's the street fighter. Syndicate itself lands somewhere in the middle of most franchise rankings. It's not groundbreaking, but it stabilized the ship after Unity nearly sank it. And Evie, she's the quiet reason a lot of people remember that game fondly at all. But if Evie brought the franchise back to its stealth roots, the next protagonist blew the entire foundation wide open. Jacob Fry. And then there's Jacob, the other twin, the one Ubisoft put on the cover, plastered across every trailer, and marketed as the face of Syndicate. And yet ask the community who the better Fry is, and the answer is almost always Evie, every single time. Here's the thing about Jacob. He's a brawler. Brass knuckles, cane swords, kukri knives, fists first, and questions never. His entire approach to the Assassin Brotherhood is punch the problem until it stops being a problem. And honestly, that's either the most entertaining thing in the franchise or the most annoying, depending entirely on your tolerance for a protagonist who treats Victorian London like a bar fight with historical landmarks. Jacob's humor is constant. He cracks jokes during missions, refuses to take anything seriously, and treats the Templar conspiracy like a mild inconvenience. Some players found that charming, a refreshing break from the brooding assassins who came before him. Others found it grating, like playing as the class clown while the world burns around you. But here's where it gets complicated. The Jack the Ripper DLC actually gave Jacob something he never had in the base game: consequences. An older, haunted Jacob, dealing with the fallout of Jack the Ripper's terror campaign across London. It's darker, heavier, and it showed what Jacob could have been if the main game had taken him more seriously. The community's verdict? Fun to play, hard to love, and forever living in his sister's shadow. But at least Jacob's problems are his own. The next protagonist on this list has problems that belong to an entire franchise: Adewale. Before Edward Kenway became the pirate everyone remembers, he had a quartermaster, a former slave named Adewale who kept the Jackdaw running, kept Edward alive, and barely got a thank you for any of it. Most players remember him as a supporting character in Black Flag, a loyal right hand, background furniture with good voice acting, but Adewale got his own story, and it's the heaviest thing Assassin's Creed has ever produced. Freedom Cry is a standalone DLC set 15 years after Black Flag, and it drops Adewale into Port-au-Prince during the height of the Atlantic slave trade. This isn't subtext. This isn't metaphor. You are liberating enslaved people from plantations, intercepting slave ships, and fighting overseers. The game forces you to watch auctions. It forces you to hear the screams from below deck. There is zero distance between you and the horror. Here's the thing. No other Assassin's Creed content has ever committed this hard to real human suffering as its central mechanic. Not as a side quest, not as flavor text, as the entire point. Adewale isn't fighting some ancient conspiracy. He's fighting the actual worst thing humans have ever done to each other, and almost nobody played it, because it's DLC. It launched as an add-on to Black Flag, and even after it went standalone, most of the community had already moved on. Critics praised Freedom Cry for its ambition and emotional weight, but the player numbers never matched the reception. Adewale became one of the franchise's most respected protagonists among the people who actually experienced his story, and a complete stranger to everyone else. That's the tragedy of Adewale. Not just what he endured in the game, but what happened to his legacy outside of it. A story this important, buried behind a purchase most people never made. But if Adewale's story suffers from being too hidden, the next protagonist has the opposite problem. Everyone knows Alexios, and almost nobody agrees on what to do with him. Basim ibn Ishaq. Basim is the franchise's most interesting experiment in years, and I don't think enough people appreciate why. He's the only protagonist in Assassin's Creed history who you meet as a supporting character in one game, then play as the lead in another. And that completely changes how his story works. Let me explain. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Basim shows up as a mysterious hidden one who helps Eivor throughout the campaign. He's charismatic, helpful, and seemingly loyal. But by the end of Valhalla, there's a massive lore reveal about who Basim actually is that recontextualizes literally everything about him. His motivations, his personality, his entire reason for existing in the story. I won't fully spoil it here, but if you know, you know. And if you don't, play Valhalla's ending before touching Mirage, because it hits completely different. Then Mirage comes along in 2023 and takes us back to 9th century Baghdad, showing Basim's origin as a street thief who joins the Hidden Ones. This is his coming-of-age story. The game strips away the RPG bloat of Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla and goes back to basics. Stealth-focused gameplay, a condensed map, linear assassination missions, the hidden blade front and center. It's the closest the franchise has felt to the original Assassin's Creed in over a decade, and the community was genuinely split on this. Some players loved it. Mirage felt like a refreshing palate cleanser after 3 massive RPGs that each demanded 100+ hours. Basim's grounded, focused story was exactly what they wanted, but others felt like the Valhalla twist made it hard to fully connect with Basim in Mirage because you already know where his story ends up. You're watching an origin story for a character whose destination you've already seen, and for some people, that removed the tension entirely. Here's the thing though, Basim carries something no other protagonist on this list does. He bridges 2 completely different eras of Assassin's Creed design, the RPG trilogy and the classic formula, in a single character arc. Whether that works for you depends entirely on which game you played first, but if you think Basim's dual identity is complicated, wait until we talk about a protagonist whose entire existence the community still argues about. Now technically, Haytham Kenway isn't a main protagonist, he's a prologue character, an antagonist, the villain of Assassin's Creed 3, but leaving him off this list would be a crime, because what Ubisoft pulled with Haytham is one of the greatest narrative tricks in gaming history. Haytham Kenway. Here's what happened. You boot up Assassin's Creed 3. You play as Haytham Kenway for the first several hours of the game. You do assassin things, you climb buildings, you stab people, you attend secret meetings. Everything about the presentation, the music, the framing, the gameplay tells you this is your hero. This is the assassin you'll be spending the next 40 hours with. And then the game reveals he's a Templar. Not just any Templar, the Grand Master of the Colonial Rite. The entire prologue was a lie. Every mission you completed, every target you eliminated, you were doing it for the enemy, and the game never once winked at you. But here's the kicker. Even after the reveal, even after Connor takes over as the actual protagonist, a massive chunk of the community still thinks Haytham is the more compelling character. He's charismatic, calculated, and genuinely believes he's doing the right thing. He's not evil for the sake of evil. He's a man with conviction, and that makes him terrifying. Haytham proves that sometimes the best protagonist isn't the hero at all. But speaking of characters who blur the line between assassin and Templar, nobody did it quite like the man who actually switched sides. Edward Kenway. Black Flag is the game that made people who didn't care about Assassin's Creed suddenly care about Assassin's Creed, and Edward Kenway is the reason why. Here's the thing about Edward. He's not an assassin. Not at the start. He's a selfish, glory-chasing Welsh pirate who stumbles into the Brotherhood's war because he thinks there's money in it. He doesn't believe in the creed. He doesn't care about Templars or assassins. He wants gold, he wants fame, and he wants to prove everyone who doubted him wrong. That's it. And that's exactly what makes his arc one of the best in the entire franchise. Because over the course of Black Flag, you watch this man lose everything. His friends, his reputation, the people who trusted him. Every selfish decision catches up to him, and the game doesn't let you look away from the consequences. By the time Edward finally commits to the assassin cause, it's not because someone anyone recruited him or gave him a speech. It's because he's got nothing left, and he realizes the only thing worth fighting for is something bigger than himself. Matt Ryan's performance carries every beat of that transformation. The charm, the arrogance, the quiet devastation when it all falls apart. Edward feels like a real person in a way that very few video game protagonists manage. Black Flag consistently ranks among the highest rated entries in the series, and Edward sits comfortably as one of the two most beloved protagonists the franchise has ever produced. He took a series that was starting to feel formulaic and blew the doors wide open with Caribbean sunshine, naval combat, and a character arc that actually earns its emotional payoff. But there's one protagonist who ranks above him, and if you've been paying attention, you already know exactly who it is. Ezio Auditore. Look, you already knew. Everybody knew. Yeah, putting Ezio anywhere other than number 1 would be dishonest, and I'm not going to pretend this was a close call. But here's the thing. The reason Ezio sits at the top isn't just nostalgia. It's because no other protagonist in this entire series got what Ezio got. A complete life. 3 full games. Not DLC, not a cameo. 3 entire titles dedicated to one man's journey. That has never happened before or since in this franchise. Assassin's Creed 2 gives you the angry, heartbroken teenager watching his family get destroyed. Brotherhood gives you the leader, the strategist building something bigger than himself in the shadow of Rome. And Revelations gives you the part nobody expected to hit so hard, the tired version. The old man still fighting, but now asking himself whether any of it was worth it. Roger Craig Smith voiced this character across all 3 games, and you can literally hear the age settle into Ezio's voice between entries. The arrogance fades, the certainty cracks. By Revelations, Ezio isn't chasing vengeance anymore. He's chasing meaning. And then there's Embers. The short film shows Ezio as an old man in Tuscany, retired, quiet, sitting on a bench with his family nearby, and then he just stops. No epic battle, no dramatic last words. Just a man on a bench, closing his eyes. And that's how the greatest assassin in the franchise goes out. It destroyed people, and the reason it worked is because we earned that moment. We spent 3 games watching this man grow from a reckless kid into someone wise enough to let go. Every scar, every loss, every lesson built to that single quiet moment on a bench. Nobody else on this list has that. Edward comes close, Bayek comes close, but nobody got the full arc. Birth to death, revenge to peace. Ezio Auditore isn't just the best Assassin's Creed protagonist, he's the reason most of us fell in love with this franchise in the first place. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.